stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our meeting tonight. We'll get started by approving our agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda as presented?
No, sir.
We have a motion to approve, please.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make the motion that we approve the agenda as printed.
Thanks, sir. Is there support?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. We'll move forward with our agenda and start where we usually do with the superintendent's report. Mark?
Thank you, Randy. I'd like to call Johnny Edwards up to give you a bond project update. Start us off with Johnny.
Good evening. Thank you, Superintendent Beelang and members of the Board of Education. My comments tonight will be a little brief because later in tonight's agenda, I will expound upon the planning for the 2021 bond. So from the 2015 bond, the only project that we have currently in progress is the softball dugouts at Central Athletic Event Facility. That project is on pause due to the weather conditions and will be finished up headed into the spring. But tonight, I do want to update the board on two projects that we've been working on over the past few months, and now we're in a good position to give more details. So first, we have storage barns that we are looking at for Northern High School and North Middle School. Last year, those projects went out for bid, but we were unable to get bids from contractors due to the timing of the project. We have re-engaged the services of Tower Pinkster. We've met with the principal and band director. We've met with Bo as well. So we've had a collaboration. Since then, we were able to modify a few things within the drawings that would not have been done had we pursued last year. We were also able to rethink the location of the northern storage barn in particular, and I'm happy to report the project is going out for bid tomorrow. We will bring a recommendation to the board this spring, and the work is scheduled to be done this summer. And then our second update is related to the Auditorium Refresh. As the board may know, that's one of the projects on the list of the unallocated contingency. So we are working with Tower Pinkster on that project as well. The scope of that project will include, for both auditoriums, upgrading the sound system, rebuilding the stage floors, modernizing the lighting network infrastructure and the architectural controls, and then also replacing the conventional lighting with LED. And then the smallest of the project is replacing the hanging multimedia projectors. So we've already held our kickoff meeting. Tower Pinkster is putting together a design for our review. Once we have an opportunity to review the designs, then we'll put the complete construction documents up for advertisement with a bid. Again, we plan to bring this package back to the board later in the spring as well, and that work would be scheduled to be completed this summer. So those are my updates from the 2015 bond, both the storage barns at Northern and North Middle School, and then the auditorium refreshes for Central High and Northern High. I'll be happy to answer any questions on.
Where are you going to build the barns?
So the Northern High School barn will be closer to the tennis courts. It would actually be just west of the tennis courts. Right now,
By the little drive to the.
Yes, there you go, right there. And then the North Middle School location will be further south along that same drive, closer to North Middle School. So that's where the two barns will be located.
How big barns are we building?
Oh man, Mike is here. I want to say they're
60 by 32, I believe. It's about
60 by 32?
Yeah.
Both of them?
Both of them,
yeah.
1,800 square feet, basically.
Yeah, and the northern barn is much higher than the north barn because of their props. So it's more. It's I think it's 16 feet height.
A little bit more height in the.
Yeah, on the high
Mostly
school.
for the theater and band, is that what we're?
That is correct.
Okay.
Theater and band.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. Any other questions on either of those projects? All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny. Our next report is on PA 48, a required reporting office. Mike Huber will handle this.
Thank you, trustees. It's good to share this bit of required information with you.
There we go, let me go back a bit. So, on our PA 48 goal, so last summer when our school aid funding package was produced and approved by our legislature, we needed to bring back goals relative to the prior year during COVID. They wanted us to use screening data that was available in summer and in fall. And we want to be able to bring to you the information relative to elementary and middle school. And we just closed our screener window on Friday. So this data is kind of fairly fresh for us right now. And so really our goal at the elementary level is 80% of students meeting benchmark by the end of the school year. And what you're seeing right now in the columns of math and reading is a fall and a winter percent of students meeting benchmark at that time. So this is aggregated throughout the district and just presents some numbers relative to our goal. We've seen some good growth and definitely some consistency in many areas. And that's reasonably normal. I do want to say that for the reading assessment here, the benchmark target changes with each screener window. So if you were proficient in fall, that does not mean that you'd be proficient in winter, because the target zone increases like we would expect students to learn throughout the year. On our math screener, one of the assessments there, which is a curriculum-based measure, follows that same format. And the other assessment there is standardized to the exit level of the grade target. Right now, those are being aggregated together to present this number of 80 students meeting benchmark by the end of the school year. So we want 80% of our students there. We're well on our way there, and that brings us back to the targets that we usually have inside of Monitoring Report 1.1, where we try and get to that 80% goal when we're comparing internally. Looking at the second graph, table that I have for you, we're looking at the middle school level on our NWEA math and reading. The NWEA assessment gives a point value. They call it a RIT score, which is a Roush unit. And that RIT score on the Roush unit is relative to just what they should be learning at that year. So this looks very similar to what you'd see on the SAT, where they give a flat score. The PSAT, we expect all students at 8th grade to be scoring at 800 when they finish the year. That's similar to what a RIT score is. And on this table, we're looking for growth from our fall to winter. And we're showing that we want to show that 80% of students are demonstrating growth by the end of the school year on this assessment. And so here we are making some progress on our math goals, and probably our reading is the area that we're paying some more attention to. These are all in conjunction to what's in the two sections of legislation that are related to this, and we'll be back in spring kind of wrapping up these particular very narrow snapshot goals for the school year relative to Public Act 48. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
So the measurement's different in the elementary versus the middle school?
Correct.
Right, because we're measuring
Growth versus
benchmark, right? So it's a different scale.
It's a different assessment measurement as well, which is why we use those two different goal targets.
Mike, can you give us a little overview on PA 48? Does it basically say that now you have to come and give us like 3 times a year updates on these?
It does, and it was relative to the School Aid Act. So a year prior to that, when we started doing the ECLP plan reports, we had to bring you goals that were similar around our screening data. And we had set targets that year for 60% of our students showing growth or meeting benchmark. And this last summer, when the legislature took up the State School Act, there's those 2 sections in there that I list at the top of the report. I think it's 98 and 104A. And those 2 sections have in there that the school district shall give these benchmark assessments in reading and mathematics to all students K-8, and shall report on those at the end of the by February report on them and at the end of the year. And we chose to report some in September as well to you, that this was the targets we were looking for. So that's what was required this year in that public act.
So, I mean, this is not unlike the data that you share with us in Monitoring Report 1.1, but the difference is we're going to be getting it at a few different times in the year, which is.
And it's
that's good.
benchmark screening data as
Yeah.
opposed to like M-STEP screener data.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Anything else from Mike? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ready to move on to board education?
Board Education, sir, yes.
All right, so, this is, really this piece of information is designed to give you a sense of where we are with implementing the 2021 bond. And, we've had a lot of, opportunity to work on this and we bring it forward. So Johnny Edwards is here along with Tom Stanek from OAK and Mike Gallivan from, Tower Pinkster. And they're tagging up together to, present today's report. So, Johnny, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you again. As Superintendent Beeling has already talked about, there's been a lot of work that has been done collaboratively in preparation for this bond. So what I would like to do is take the board through some slides, and then near the end of the presentation, when we get to the last portion, I'll defer to Mike as well as Tom. So this particular slide is a graphic that shows how we will be organized within our bond project. So just starting from the bottom, going up, each of our schools will have what we call a building advisory team. And you'll see the 6 elementary schools along with community high. We'll work collaboratively with the core design leadership team, which would include myself as well as Dr. Pasco, Kelly Gensinius, as well as the other positions you see there in the core design team. As extension of those, our Director of Finance as well as our Community Relations Manager will help us in the areas of obviously budgeting for finance as well as communication through the Community Relations Manager. And that would all funnel through Superintendent Beeling and then up through the Board of Education. So this structure is similar to what was in 2015 with a few minor exceptions, obviously. But this is a way for us to ensure that we're getting feedback up and down the organization for this upcoming project. So tonight, we would like to cover 4 areas. Just a quick review of preparation for the bond, activities since the bond is passed, a preliminary scoping sequence, and then fourth and finally, the architectural design and construction, which Mike and Tom will take for us. So a few of our signature events in 2015, the school district adopted guiding principles of decision-making. And then in 2019, there were educational specifications that were done by an outside vendor, which helped shape the direction for the bond. And then obviously our good news is on August 3rd, the bond was passed by our community. Now, activities since the bond has passed, and we've been able to check off a number of things, some of these of which I've updated you with periodically. So first, we entered into a contract with Plant Moran Cressa to assist us with the RFP process for both the architectural and the construction management services. That was a great service for us to partner with in order to help through all of the paperwork and logistics of accepting proposals from the firms that we decided to select. In September, we revised the guiding principles, and those revisions will look similar to this. So this is our 2015 guiding principles, which starts with creating 21st century learning centers to serve all our learners in all ages and all areas, down to minimizing disruption while maintaining a long-term perspective. And so what we were able to do is take our 2015 guiding principles and use that as a benchmark for 2021. I just want to note a couple exceptions between the guiding principles of 2015 and 2021. First and foremost, if you look at our 6th bullet down, in 2015, we talked about creating healthy competition. So in the last bond, athletics was a huge portion of that particular project with the high schools particularly. In 2021, because we're not dealing with athletics particularly, we removed that portion of healthy competitions and included citizenship. Another key difference you'll notice is the next bullet down. It talks about complementing the distinct campuses. In 2015, most of the work was done on the northern campus and the central campus. Obviously, there was an exception to West Middle School. But in this particular bond, we're looking at schools within neighborhoods. So we want to be respectful of the neighborhood context. But the rest of the guiding principles are almost identical to what they were in 2015. Those serve the district well, and we want to continue to build upon those successes. October 12th, we sold our first series of bonds, which was roughly $50 million. As the board may know, we have 4 series in this particular bond project, with the first of which has been sold this past year. November 8th, we brought the recommendation. We select the Tower Pinkston and Fielding International as our architects. December 6th and 7th, we conducted discovery visits for our elementary schools. And this is where our representatives from Tower Pinkston and Fielding, they came and walked through our existing elementaries to see what our schools look like, but also to see what teaching and learning looks like inside of those classrooms. We were able to sneak over to Lake Center as well, just to make a comparison of what elementary design looked like in the mid-2000s to today. And that was really a really fascinating experience of seeing the difference in those buildings, but also see the difference of what future elementary education looks like. What you will also note is that evening, we brought the schools together with their principals, and we did workshops with the staff, about 90 minutes. And many of the staff members said, wow, this did not feel like a 90-minute experience, because they were engaged in that process. I just want to show the board a few pictures of that. What you'll see here is a collage of several pictures. You'll see the teams of schools working together in their group stations. You also see sticky notes and collaboration that occurred the entire time. People were able to get up, walk, and talk, share notes, to talk about what does the future of teaching and learning look like in Portage Public Schools. So we were happy to do that with all 6 elementary schools. December 10th, Tower Pinkston and Fielding International brought those findings of what they learned from our staff and met back with the core leadership design team to kind of share, hey, here are some things that we picked up from our experience of walking through the schools, as well as meeting with the teachers. On the 13th of December, we selected OAK as our construction manager, and as you know, they were instrumental in our 2015 bond as well. January 7th, we had our initial kickoff meeting, in which we invited both Tower Pinkston and Fielding International, as well as OAK together. We wanted to just discuss our processes. Our norms, how do we plan to communicate, who's responsible for which projects, and how will we operate as a group. 1 week later, we followed up with our partners again, and this is where we kind of talked about our master schedule, the scope and sequence of the projects, to see what direction are we headed and how we're going to get there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our next couple of slides. The 20th of January, we engaged our elementary principals and our district instructional staff. Again, we want to talk about teaching and learning from the principals for the future. And this was an opportunity to get our principals roughly a half day. I think we did about a 3-hour session on the 20th with our principals, just to talk again about teaching and learning. What are some themes we're noticing in our discussions with staff and with the core leadership design team? And just here are a few pictures from that particular engagement. Again, this was a collaborative process. You'll see sticky notes, you'll see group work, and principals were able to talk about key designs or concepts that resonated. And we learned new terms like learning studios and learning walls and learning commons, all of which kind of talk to the future of design for elementary education, and our principals were able to weigh in on some of those concepts of what they saw as most important. The 24th and 25th of January, a team from Portage Public Schools, I believe it was 5 of us, along with representatives from Tower, Pinkster, and Fielding International and OAK. We visited Salt Lake City, Utah to see elementary design concepts. We chose this particular city because Fielding International designed one of the two schools we visited. But this same district, which is much larger than us, they had another elementary school that was designed by another local architect, and we wanted to just compare notes on these two buildings. The building that Fielding International built was open this year, and the other school was opened within the last 2 years. So this was really good for us to see some of those concepts we've talked about conceptually actually in person. We visited Davis School District in Utah those 2 days, and here are just a couple pictures. You'll see a lot of colors. Things are open. Furniture is flexible. And these were some of the takeaways from our visits. You'll see in the middle picture, people were even touching walls to look at texture as well. But we learned a lot of key lessons by seeing the actual concepts in practice. Everything from teacher workrooms to what they call Da Vinci labs or science labs as well. Then our third area is our preliminary scope and sequence. And here's our process. Various informal discussions and formal meetings have occurred to determine the sequence of the schools as well as swing space. That was one of my first questions to Mr. Herron upon my arrival. Which schools are going when and how do we know that? And he said, it depends. And so we had to go through that whole conversation about what does it depend on. So we met with Tower, Pinkster, and Fielding International, as I mentioned earlier, to talk about that master schedule and to determine some pros and cons. We actually reviewed 13 different options for the sequence and for swing space. What we found out, some options were better than others, and we did kind of like a process of elimination to determine what we determined to be the best option. So in order to make that decision, we had to talk about what we know. So what we know is Amberley, Central L, and Haverhill can be constructed on site with their existing school in operation. England and Woodland must relocate into a swing space during construction. So those campuses are not large enough for us to be able to build a new school while its existing school is in operation. We will have to demo those buildings prior to construction. What we know is PPS currently does not have a swing school, and therefore we must create one. We also know that swing space is created by operating two schools on the same site simultaneously. Amberley, Central L, and Haverhill are the schools that must be considered first in the sequence in order for us to create a swing school. And again, the sequence cannot be determined without identifying the swing school. So this particular slide is particularly collaboration. You have three entities here. You have Portage Public Schools, you have architects, and you have our construction manager firm. And we're trying to find that sweet spot. Our emphasis as a school district is on administration and operations. The architects are looking at the architectural design of a building that currently does not exist and what constraints are there given their existing schools are on site. And then obviously OAK, they're looking at how do we get in and out of our sites in a safe manner in order to do this type of work. So we had to meet somewhere in the middle. So here's what we've determined as a preliminary scope and sequence. It would be unfair for us to try to determine how every project will go from stem to stern over the next 10 years. So what we wanted to do is just lay out a couple of preliminary things for the school board to be aware of. So it is our plan to develop or build Central Elementary and Haverhill Elementaries in our first round, and Tom Stanek will talk a little bit more about that. We're also going to create building advisory teams in that structure in which I showed you on the organizational chart. Both Central L and Haverhill will roll with creating those advisory teams to be a subset of teachers, support staff, maybe a parent or two or a partner organization, and possibly some upper L students as well. And then lastly, what we plan to do over the next several weeks is engage these building advisory teams, have meetings with students, with staff, and community stakeholders about this process that we're going through. Then our last portion is around the architectural design phase and construction. First slide will be Mike, and then the second slide will be Tom.
Thank you, Johnny. So, as Johnny mentioned, we've been through a lot. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of basically just data gathering. So that's a really important piece, and Fielding International, who is our design partner, kind of led those engagements, talked about how are we going to bring out what kind of educational buildings are we going to build for you. So all that data has been put into place, and now we got to start turning those into some kind of plans. So when we get into the planning phase, that's really schematic design. So that first part of any project is the schematic design phase. We take the data that we've gathered, and there will be more through future engagements that are coming in, but we start to lay out that floor plan, start to answer the questions, what is 21st century learning for Portage Public Schools? How does that fit with community and staff? And everybody's gonna be involved in those buildings. So that schematic phase and engagement phase is gonna be kind of taking us through this spring. And then we'll work on design development phase. So we take what comes out of that schematic phase, develop a little bit further. So we start talking some specifics on, building systems, get a little bit more detailed information. It's kind of like in schematic, you're at a 50,000, foot view, and then you're kind of zooming in as you get through each of these phases. So design development is a big phase. We're getting a lot of discovery, a lot of questions answered. And then once we get through that, we get into the construction document phase, and this is where Tom really wants us to excel. Let's get those drawings shown so we can get bidders to give us good prices. They have an easy time to build it. So the decision-making has been pretty much completed during DD. Now we're getting the detailed information done. So we're saying in the fall of '22, we'll have that construction document phase done, and then we'll bid at the end of the year. So right now, we're working on this schedule that we're in this design phase for the rest of this year. All right, thank you.
So with that, from the standpoint of completing the bid documents, this is essentially where we landed on from a starting standpoint for the two first projects that Johnny was referring to, that master schedule. And I think one of the important things for us and the district and Tower Pinks is to really understand the overall budget. So we have to identify what that is and keep consistent throughout all the projects there. We have Central Elementary starting the spring of 2023, and you'll see there's a little bit of a lag between the two projects there, and that was really done for a couple of reasons. One, we understood last time there were some lessons learned between one project and the next, and we want to take advantage of that. The second is that because of the way the market is right now, there's a lot of challenges, there's not as many bidders and things. So this really gives an opportunity for a contractor to not, if they didn't get, for example, the first project, they have an opportunity to look at that second project, which is only about 5 to 6 months behind that. So that's kind of why that is staggered the way that is there. We anticipate that the projects are going to take roughly 20 months, and then there's some additional site work that's got to happen after that. Essentially, you have to take the schools down, abatement, all those components, and then the site work with the paving and the parking lots. So that's really kind of the overall schedule for the first two projects. We'll continue discussing the remainder of the projects there, but again, we'll watch the budgets and make sure that we're holding those all true, for all the projects for the next 8-9 years. So
That concludes our portion of the presentation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions from the board.
Hey, Johnny,
Yes.
so does that mean that the first elementary school would be finished around the middle of the 2024-25 school year?
It would be closer to the 25-26, if my math is correct, because it'll be at least 20 months. So let's just say roughly 24 months. So it'll take almost 2 years to completely build the first school, which is Central L.
Spring 23, right? 12 months is spring 24, and then you've got most of 24 and into 25.
Right, you're right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes,
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
correct.
yeah.
So, yeah.
And so these two schools would be on the same campus as the ones it's replacing. And so you have a little wiggle room with when you finish, because the kids just need to walk across the parking lot into their new school.
That is correct. That is correct. And with that staggering, we'll have to talk later about, each of these projects will not be able to open ideally in the fall.
Yeah.
We may be able to do some things mid-year, if at all possible. Yes.
And then, are you far enough along in your thinking to know that when that third project will start? Or is that, you still have to leave that a little bit open?
No, we've laid out a process for the entire 10 years, but we didn't want to get too far down the road without saying, hey, we may have to tweak or revise something. So we wanted to say, hey, let's nail down these two projects first, but we do have a sequence that we are proposing to look at for all the schools over the next decade.
I'm really enthused that you're going to really start with two at the same time. We were probably being very conservative, but in my mind, it was probably going to be sequenced one after the other. So to see two of them move relatively quickly, I think that's really good news.
And if we were to do one school at a time, we would probably go beyond a 10-year window.
Okay.
So we wanted to be a little more assertive, but not too aggressive in our planning.
Thank you.
Johnny, neither of these are the swing schools?
So we have identified Haverhill as the swing school. Central L will not be a swing school because the site's logistics is not feasible for us to keep both schools up. So Haverhill will be the swing school, but we are also considering whether or not we should include Amberley as a second swing school, either at the same time or at a later time. But Haverhill will be the initial swing school for either Anglin Road or Woodland.
So then both the old and the new schools will be operating simultaneously on the same site?
Correct. Yep, at Haverhill. Yeah. So we just want to, again, we've agreed that Haverhill is our ideal swing school initially. And as we're developing our timelines, we're trying to determine whether or not it makes sense to have a second swing school or not. If so, again, it will be several years down the road. We just don't want to lock ourselves into that decision at this moment, given the length of the project.
Is there a chance to, and I guess I'm asking Tom this question, when you're talking about bidders and somebody who didn't get could bid for the second, do you also see it as an opportunity for bidders to say, I'm gonna bid on both of these jobs and we'll keep our people busy for a long period of time? Like, you know, if it's 3 months to do this, then we can do 3 months here and 3 months there. It's just a question.
Yeah, probably right now, we weren't thinking of having the bid packages going out at the same time. So that would defer really bidding them separately, and the same thing from the design standpoint. But again, I think it gives them a great opportunity to take a look at that second project to bid that. So
Yeah.
right now, we don't have it as one.
Okay, just curious.
Yep. But I would say that if a company or organization had the manpower to do both of them, we would certainly allow and take a look at that and, you know, go through the pre-qualification process to making sure. It just, right now is a big challenge with personnel and with equipment and material. So we want to do our due diligence from that perspective to make sure that
Just
we're
seem
lining
like
up.
from a consistency standpoint, it might be a good deal for all concerned, so.
Yeah, you certainly could have somebody that does, for example, the site work, and they could be, you know, done with the site work on the front side for Central and want to take a look at Haverhill for another opportunity.
Cool, thank you.
Johnny, are we starting with Central so that we can have it knocked down hopefully by the fall of '25 versus starting with Haverhill, which is going to be our swimming school and stuff like that?
Right, so we believe it'll be easier for Haverhill to transition at a fall. I'm sorry, it'll be easier for Haverhill to transition during the fall versus mid-year moving from their existing building into a new building. Whereas with Central L, given the site logistics with athletic fields and things of that nature, what we're trying to do is take Central L offline and free up space for parking, athletic events, and things of that nature. So that's a little bit where Central L is a higher priority, but also Central L will move from a 450 building to a 600. So that'll give us some additional flexibility in this project. Unlike the other schools, they'll ideally remain the same size. So I know we'll have more information in time to come. If there are any other questions, I'll be happy to answer.
I just appreciate you going through the process, and I'm particularly impressed with all the collaboration that's going on between all the people who have a piece of this, and that's going to ensure that we get a good result in the end. And I'm particularly pleased that the users of those buildings got together again, because those ed specs were put together in 2019, and it's really good to keep that current. So I appreciate all the work that's been done here.
Thank you.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny, Tom, Mike, appreciate it. You have really a good team working on this, very thoughtful in how they're approaching both process and product. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mark. We'll now move to our comments and communications section. I believe we have some folks that want to address the board tonight, so we'll let our secretary, Dr. Celeste Shelton Harris, read our guidelines for public comment. Thank you.
Portage Public Schools Board of Education public comment at board meetings. The board welcomes community input at our board meetings and recognizes the importance of allowing members of the public to express themselves on district matters. To permit fair and orderly public expression, please conform to these guidelines when addressing the board. Attendees must register their intention to speak during the public participation portion of the meeting by completing the speaker registration form at the beginning of the meeting. Individuals may not register others to speak. Speakers will be recognized by the presiding officer and may not be called in the order in which they have signed up to speak. Speakers are requested to state their name, address, and group affiliation if available. Important comments limit comments to 3 minutes. Direct all comments to the board and not to a staff or other participants. Speakers may not yield any of their speaking time to others. Provide a written copy of your comments and supporting documentation to the board secretary if available. Present your comments in a respectful and professional manner to model the behavior expected of students. Refrain from mentioning any student by name. Contact the superintendent directly regarding personnel matters. Board of Education meetings are held for the purpose of conducting the business of the school district and are not considered to be community meetings. Board members are not obligated to respond to issues raised during public comment. Normally, such issues are referred to or followed up by our administrators.
Very good, thank you, Celeste. And we welcome 7 speakers tonight. Our first speaker is Kelly Sackett.
Hello, my name is Kelly Sackett, and I live in Texas Township. I'm a parent of 2 Portage Central High School students. I passed out a picture earlier today that's not very clear, but what it is a box of masks, as everybody can see. And on the label it says, this product is a ear loop mask. This product is not a respirator and will not provide any protection against COVID-19, coronavirus, or other viruses or contaminants. So my question is, why are our children still being required to wear this mask every single day in the school when right on the box it states that it doesn't protect against COVID-19? Every American should be worried about the COVID generation. Over the last 2 years, our country schools have lost a huge part of their education, and they're now at risk of losing their futures. Rescuing these kids is urgently important and for the sake of our nation. Today's students are tomorrow's leaders, and if they aren't prepared, America itself won't be able to take the lead. What's happening to our children breaks my heart. Even before the pandemic, they were struggling to find the best shot at the best life. Pre-COVID, 2/3 of America's elementary and middle school students weren't proficient in reading. Nearly the same number, they weren't proficient in math. Yet instead of helping our kids get ahead, these past 2 years have pushed them further behind. School lockdowns and virtual learning have been a total disaster. It's now clear that school lockdowns had a nearly zero effect on saving lives, but they did dramatic damage to students' lives. At almost 100% of teachers reported seeing their students fail to learn during the pandemic, and sure enough, the typical K through 12 students now are 4 months behind in reading and 5 months behind in math. Black and brown students suffer even more. They lost half a year. Low-income students lost even more than that. Their futures depend greatly on education, and they're just not getting it. Even the one day lost of learning is unacceptable. 6 months is unthinkable. You can't afford to be 6 months behind when you're a sixth grader learning algebra. You can't afford it when you're a 12th grader preparing to go to college or a job. And if you spent half of first grade missing out, you're going to spend the rest of your life trying to catch up. As a mother, it pains me to think about the future these kids are facing, the mental health issues, lack of social skills, and lessons that were never learned. The COVID generation is a rough ride. Saving the COVID generation is a major necessity. Yet at the exact same moment, our school children need help. In so many cases, they're being hurt even more. Our schools are so busy making sure that children are properly wearing masks and chasing them down to yet again miss more days out of class for contact tracing. Our kids deserve better, and parents are demanding better. Take the mask off of our children and let them get back to living normal lives. We cannot continue to have our children live in fear of contracting a virus that they have a 99.99% chance of recovering from, fear of transmitting a virus to the community, which has statistically never occurred. It is not our children's responsibility to control community mitigation, nor is it your job as the elected board to worry more about community mitigation than the very students that you are elected to protect.
3 minutes, Kelly. Thank you. Our next speaker tonight is, did I get this right, Chris? Rassman. Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I'm Chris Roschler. I live at 720 West Osterhout, and I'm just a concerned citizen and taxpayer. I'd like to address the fact in September, the school board did a closed session and voted to rescind all their authority and responsibilities for the COVID decisions and gave emergency powers to the superintendent. What is the purpose of having a school board, if that's the case? If you're not responsible or courageous enough to do your job in one of the most important events of our lifetime, and what credentials does Superintendent Baylane possess in order for him to make these far-reaching medical decisions? Why are you illegally participating or practicing medicine without a license by mandating that PPS students wear a medical device? Do you have a medical degree that we're not aware of? Where are you getting your information from to make these decisions? So first we're told you're following the Kalamazoo Health Department for quarantining en masse, and then on December 17th, 2021, KHD rescinded that their mask order, and PPS kids still weren't allowed to breathe freely. Even though 10 miles away, Vicksburg and Schoolcraft, they can. Obviously, you know something, and are you qualified that the school board or the county health, other than the school board and county health directors know? On 1/13/2022, the CDC recommended universal indoor masking by all students, ages 2 and older, staff, teachers, and visitors, K through 12, schools regardless of vaccine status. And, I just recommend that you start questioning the agencies. They're always flip-flopping on so many decisions, and you cannot limit the spread of a virus. And the children have a 99.99% recovery rate from COVID. And walking in here tonight, I expected a little resistance on wearing a mask in here. Well, I walk in and I see some of you people from the board feel comfortable with not wearing a mask, and you allow some of the other people in here without masks. So why are we allowing our students to wear those masks for 8 hours a day? That's pretty much all I got.
Chris, thank you for
Thank
your
you.
comments. Our next speaker tonight, get this right, is it Jackie Hurd? Do I have that right? Okay. Welcome.
Welcome. My name is Jacqueline. I'm in the Texas Portage area. I want to discuss a timeline of the ESSER 3 funds and understand why it looks suspicious to me, given the timeline. October the 5th, 2020, parents received an email about the decision by the Supreme Court that Whitmer had no mandate. In the same email, you addressed her return to school roadmap, which included a mass. April 21st, Whitmer Return to School Roadmap is created, and she references this in her state plan she submitted to the U.S. Department of Education for her ESSER 3 funds. April 22nd, the final interim requirement becomes effective. Under the interim final requirement, each public school district that receive American Rescue Plan ESSER 3 funds must develop a plan for its use of ARP ESSER funds and submit it to the state education agency with a reasonable time determined by the state. In order to receive the remaining 1/3 ESSER funds, strings were attached, one of which was wearing a mask. April 30th, in the email, Portage Public Schools said masking will be a family choice. April 30th, another email to the parents, they have an option with regards to in-person virtual learning. June 15th, 2021, Michigan Department of Education submitted its initial American Rescue ESSER 3 plan for use review. July 12th, another email was sent to the parents about family choice. July 13, the Michigan legislature passed and the governor signed into law Public Act 48 of 2021, appropriating for equalization payment for ESSER 3 funds. On August 18, another email went out, the emergency order from the Kalamazoo County Health Department. August 21st, 2021, an article was published, Michigan Board of Education clash over mask rules during meeting. August 20th, 2021, mask mandate by Kalamazoo County Health Department. October the 6th, 2021, Whitmer submits her final plan for ESSER 3 to the U.S. Department of Education. October the 8th, 2021, U.S. Department of Education approved ESSER 3 funds to the state. So many parents were very excited to know their kids were coming to school with a choice that did not happen. My question is, were there strings did you string us along saying we will have choice, while in reality, in the background, you were applying for ESSER 3 funds, which are tied to masking? It seems as if the state had already submitted its initial plan to the U.S. Department of Education, June 15, 2021, but you already made your decision October 5th, 2020. I have requested FOIA to get that information as to when you submitted your plan. I know that Whitmer did she got the approval from the United States Education Board October the 8th, and that means that 60 days from there, you guys should have your disbursement, but apparently it hasn't happened yet. So I am questioning that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Our next speaker tonight is Michelle Roschler, please. Welcome.
I want to talk about the ESSER 3 funds as well. One of the portions that we discovered after researching into the allotment, that there's a sizable portion for Portage Public Schools that's over $11 million. We do see that the money came with major federal strings attached. They're persuading you to adopt policies unfavorable and even dangerous to student health and well-being. The catch is that federal generosity for state educational agencies is contingent on states providing to the Department of Education reports submitted twice a year through the fall of 2023 that you are meeting requirements synced with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's safety recommendations. The CDC's aggressive recommendations include enforcing universal and correct wearing of masks, physically modifying schools to facilitate distancing, ensuring respiratory etiquette and hand washing with questionable chemicals in the soaps and sanitizers, and the strenuous cleaning protocols, facilitating contact tracing, conducting testing, coordinating with the state and local health officials, and engaging in efforts to provide vaccinations to school communities, which I really question. More than 40% of school districts plan to spend some of their ESSER funds on improvements to heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. That raises a potential red flag in light of the EPA's authorization in February of 21 through a slippery public health emergency exemption of a potentially hazardous nanoparticle-based air treatment called GreenGuard Pure. I do have a handout for you guys to read. It's an antiviral air treatment. It disperses a chemical authorized for indoor use through the HVAC system. It allows for GreenGuard's Pure use in indoor spaces when adherence to current public health guidelines is impractical or difficult to maintain. Where will this be permitted? The agency lists governmental facilities, healthcare facilities, food processing facilities, and public transit. The EPA's definition of government facilities doesn't appear to include schools, but the agency does admit to studying use of air treatment technologies on school buses. A senior EPA scientist conceded last August how safe the technologies are, particularly for sensitive populations such as children, is not fully understood. So they don't really know the long-term effects of this. And it's basically an experimental air treatment on school buses and could become in the schools. It's going to potentially be used in healthcare facilities as well. This is, the chemical they're using is triethylene glycol, which is antifreeze. So that's what they're talking about pumping through the air in lots of public places. So we want to know if this was why you had the closed door session in August and elected to the superintendent to make a call based on CDC guidance, and who in Portage Public Schools is making the decision of where these funds are spent, how much has already been spent, and on what it was spent. If you have any intent to bring in untested chemical in the school district, we want to know who's responsible for doing the due diligence safety research so you're not poisoning our children with an untested product. Remember, at one point in time, asbestos and DDT were approved and marketed as safe. And I have a photo, it shows that DDT was sprayed directly on children by a health professional, and we know the harmful effects of that. So there's a lot going on. We really hope that you will educate yourself and look into that and make necessary, safe decisions for our children, because they've gone through too much as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Our next speaker is Lori Leparo, please.
Hi, I'm Lori Leparo. I live in Portage, 6725 Pleasant View Drive. I have 2 kids at Portage Northern. On December 17th, the County Health Department dropped the mask mandate for schools. Several nearby school districts, including Schoolcraft and Vicksburg, have dropped their mask requirement within their school buildings. Even the entire country of England completely ended its mask mandates. Florida has been mask-free since August 2020, and their COVID numbers are the same or better. Therefore, I would like to ask Portage Public Schools Superintendent, what will it take to drop the Portage Public Schools mask mandate? First, I'll start by mentioning the lack of benefit achieved from mask wearing. Many studies have shown that cloth and surgical masks don't work to stop the spread of the virus. Now that I've addressed that, there are virtually no benefits to mask wearing. Let's look at the harm caused by them. I'll leave this face mask safety facts with you. Regular mask wearing reduces the oxygen from being able to breathe in and increases the buildup of carbon dioxide, which is pretty obvious to most people. And they've done tests and they found that this to be true. Some symptoms of oxygen depletion are fatigue, difficulty concentrating, headaches, lightheadedness. And if masks are worn during exercise or in the heat, they have even caused death to athletes. Because oral bacteria builds up inside the mask, children sometimes suffer from rashes or even more serious skin infections, and they can get sick because of the mask wearing. There are negative psychological effects as well, anxiety and depression. Clearly, the benefits of masks do not outweigh the negative factors. So if the superintendent doesn't intend to require Portage Public School students to wear masks forever, he must be looking for specific things to happen to signal that the mask mandate can be ended. Is it a specific drop in COVID positive tests? Is it a reduction in COVID-related hospitalizations? Or the percentage of people who have been vaccinated? We deserve to know what criteria need to be met for Portage Public School to drop its mask mandate. The school district claims to care about the health and safety of its students, but the superintendent's decision to continue this mask mandate has not been shown to be beneficial to the students' health and safety. So what is the superintendent's reason for keeping the mask mandate in place? Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Our next speaker is M.H. Toth.
Both.
Toth. Oh, okay, got it. But I got the TH this time.
You did, yeah. You got the MH, right? Make it happen. Hi, my name is M.H. Toth, and I've got 2 kids currently in this school district. I came to my first school board meeting 2 weeks ago because I was curious about the strings possibly attached to the millions of dollars that were received with the ESSER funds. And based on what I have learned from researching your actions over the past 6 months, I have more questions in regards to competency. Waiving responsibility and practicing medicine without a license concerns me. My elementary school student is dyslexic, and because of this, she learns best when she can see her teachers and peers' faces and read their lips and understand what they are saying. I would like to know how parents were notified that you are making provisions for students with disabilities to keep you from discriminating against my special needs child, which is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Her dyslexia was diagnosed by a PhD at the Michigan Dyslexia Institute, not a medical doctor, so I really don't understand how I'm supposed to get a waiver based on the criteria. So far, 1/3 of her time at PPS has been behind a mask or a screen. My sophomore was at a cheer competition this weekend in this building, and I watched 4 other teams. 2 girls out of those 4 different schools were wearing masks. All of the Portage cheer team was wearing their masks. And then when they got up to go on the mat, they gave their masks to one of their teammates. She stacked them all together, which is not hygienic at all. No issues with contamination there. It's just a farce at this point. I don't know if you noticed, but the gentlemen that had done all this work and all this research were wearing their masks before they spoke. They took it off to speak, then they sat back down. Because we all understand, you walk through a restaurant, you sit down, and you walk through a hall and you sit down, and it's 2 different things. You're not going to be able to see my phone, but I'd like you to hear and listen to the response of these children when they are told they are no longer required to wear masks in school. With all the fear and stress of the past 2 years, change is hard. If before I played that tape, you expected them to be scared, then I really ask you, I beg you to look at yourself in the mirror tonight and ask, what are you doing to these children? Because it sounds to me like it's either fear without logic, which I understand fear is real, okay? An arbitrary decision, or it's about ESSER money. Kids know the truth. It was a little boy who kept telling the townspeople that the emperor was naked. He didn't care how much they ridiculed him because it was true. The CDC has lost more credibility than ever imagined with its continual flip-flopping. When does it end at PPS? If you can't immediately produce a list of the quantifiable requirements you are personally following in order to end these masks, then you're playing a game with these children's lives, and that needs to end. It is time to personally decide which part of history you're going to land on, because you took an oath to support the Constitution. As an Army officer, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't consider you enemies, okay? But you want to make sure that you don't become one. Tonight, I ask you to choose the harder right over the easier wrong and give parents the choice of whether or not to mask their children. Thank you.
Thank you, MH. Our last speaker tonight is Emily Crawford. Welcome.
Good evening, Emily Crawford, 9427 Oakview. Echoing over here about when is this charade going to end? Because that's what it appears to most reasonable adults, that this is a charade. Again, you're not going to catch COVID walking 3 feet to your chair in the restaurant, but people jump through that hoop to go eat out. This is ridiculous. Kids go out after school and play together. Why? Same kids that they're sitting next to in class, but they're not playing outside with masks. You go look at Oakland Park at how they're sledding. Kids never met each other, jumping on sleds, riding around left and right. No, not a mask in sight. We don't have this mass outbreak going on in our schools. Yes, COVID happens. It does. It's going to be here to stay. It's time for this to end. It's time for us to be reasonable, still educate about, hey, here's what we can do to make ourselves healthier. Here's what we can do to try to make, work on our hand washing. Let's work on going outside, getting exercise, how to eat properly, versus putting this thing over your face that you can stand outside in the cold and see all the breath coming through. You know it's not stopping anything. Please make this stop. It is enough. Countries around the world are stopping this. The United Kingdom dropped everything. Other school districts around here, I believe Plainwell even, just dropped theirs. This needs to end. Look for your students and what you're doing to your students. Elementary schools, I have a kid that's in 2nd grade who hasn't had a normal year yet. It needs to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you much. Thank you very much for all your comments this evening. We're going to move forward with comments from Board Trustees. Does anyone have anything to share this evening?
Just a reminder about Portage Central opening Anastasia this Friday. Tickets are on sale.
Thank you. Any board committee reports? Okay, we'll move to our consent agenda, and tonight we have minutes on the consent agenda. We're here to approve the January 24th, 2022 regular business meeting minutes and the January 31st, 2022 special meeting minutes. Are there any exceptions to the consent agenda as presented? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. And we'll move on to assurance of district performance. We have 2 monitoring reports tonight, and Mark, we'll let you get started.
Thanks, Randy. I want to spend just a little bit of time with this 1.5. This is a revised ends policy the board did in 2020, so a little over a couple years ago. Just restated in a different way the intent of what was there previously. And then last year, in October, you reordered your ends policies, so this one became 1.5, and it's the old 1.4. The way it's written, the board, it's really around what is good citizenship. And there were 3 elements that the board defined good citizenship to mean. And one is ethical behavior, second is respect for individual differences, and third is respect for cultures other than their own. And so the interpretation has changed just a little bit based on the change in the language. That ethical behavior I'm interpreting to mean that the ability to discern right from wrong is outlined in our student code of conduct. And I'm using the same measures, truancy rates, physical assaults, illegal possession, larceny, and student attendance as the data points for what ethical behavior is. Respect for individual differences means that students recognize differences between individuals, understand their significance, and respond to others with interest, politeness, and care. And we currently do not have an established measure for determining whether students acquire those skills or not, which is the same as before. What I've done in the past is try to highlight some things that the district is doing to help students respect individual differences. Very similar to respect for cultures other than their own, that the students recognize other cultures, they understand their significance, and respond with interest, politeness, and care. And there too, we have no measures in place. The report on ethical behavior is very similar to what you've seen in the past. The activities that the district provides or students engage in are listed there, which are, again, very similar to what you've seen in the past. There is no data on those categories that I mentioned for the 2021 school year. That was not required to be kept by the state. And with the different modes of instruction we were in, that would not be, it would be data that wouldn't be very meaningful to us. So once that becomes available again, we'll pick up and just show that 2021 was kind of a gap year for that. The only one where there is information available for was attendance, but again, the calculation for attendance rates last year is different by the state than it was in previous years. So you'll see an uptick in attendance, but that's primarily due to the change in definition for attendance. The respect for individual differences data is very similar in a listing of the clubs and organizations. And the report that follows, again, is slightly updated from what you've seen in the past. And I will say that many of these groups and organizations that are providing our schools support both individual differences and cultures. There's a crossover on many of those that our students are involved in. So rather than repeat them, I give you just a listing of some that I feel contribute to that. And lastly, we've always provided this diversity in our students and our workforce. The information that you see here is not updated yet. It's information, it's not part of the report, but it's something that we've provided because it's good information to track. And as soon as I can get this updated, I will provide you with copies of that. I don't anticipate a lot of change in either the student side or the staff side. So, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Any questions for Mark tonight?
Just, appreciate the data. I know it's hard to collect data on these, and a number of these we don't have measures for, but, your search for other school districts that do have measures that we can copy is ongoing, and some of these are just hard to measure, so appreciate the efforts in what we do have.
Thank you.
Anything else? Could we entertain a motion then on page 11 to approve the monitoring report?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that the board accept as presented the monitoring report on 1.5 ends as a reasonable interpretation and evidence of compliance with policy.
Thank you, Keith. Is there support? I support it. Thank you, Celeste. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion passes and the monitoring report is approved. Our next monitoring report is monitoring report 2.4, financial planning. Mark.
Don't need to spend much time on this, other than to point out that the basic intent of this policy is to make sure that our fund balance remains above 7%, and the 2021 budget ended with an unassigned fund balance of 13.2%, and the budget that was approved by the board in June 2021 anticipated a unassigned fund balance this year of 9.89%, both which remain above 7%. We don't anticipate needing to borrow any money to meet our payroll obligations, and you'll hear an updated report on our first budget amendment later on in the meeting, which may change that anticipated end-of-year fund balance for this year. But this is the information as of the writing of this report, so that's all I really wanted to mention on this report. Everything else is pretty much the same as what you've seen in the past.
Any comments or questions for Mark?
Yeah, I guess I'll do my normal one, that it doesn't account for the multi-$100 million deficit we serve for our teachers and administrator pension that we have no known way to pay for. I mean, that we don't account for because the state doesn't make us account for that deficit, so.
As is true for every
For every school district in the state, it's not us, it's $100 million plus, and we don't account for it. It's a liability to the school district of Portage, and the state doesn't make us, they make us put it on our balance sheet, but they don't make us pay for it or account for it. So,
Thanks for that, Kurt.
I'm sorry, that's my obligation as chair of the audit
I know.
committee to bring that up. So, we have no way to pay for it, and we don't account for it.
Any other comments on this one? Great news on the fund balance and great management of our district funds. We sure appreciate that. There's a motion, please, on page 26.
President Van Antwerp, I move that the Board of Education accept as presented the monitoring report on 2.4 financial planning, budgeting as a reasonable interpretation and evidence of compliance with policy.
Thank you, Terry. Is there support?
I support.
Thanks, Celeste. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes and monitoring report 2.4 is approved. And we have one item left on our agenda, and that's our discussion item of the 21-22 budget amendment. Welcome, Paula.
Good evening, Board of Ed and Superintendent Beeling. Tonight, I will share with you an update on our First Amendment to the general fund. We will conduct another one in June. This is our First Amendment. I first want to take you back to June of last year. This is very sensitive, sorry. I want to take you back to June of last year to our budget hearing. We did not know what our foundation allowance was going to be at the time that we had to pass our budget. By law, we're required to pass the budget by the end of June, so I had to put some assumptions into factor to build that budget. We built our budget on a $200 per pupil foundation allowance increase, or funding of $8,311, blended enrollment of 8,741 students, and as I mentioned, on June 28th, the board did approve that budget. On the expense side of that budget, there was a $718,000 deficit that was a planned deficit. Included in that budget was the start of building the Portage Virtual Elementary for our elementary students only at that time, and that was about $258,000. But also, I did not include, beyond that, in the preliminary budget, the one-time federal funds that we are receiving as a district, such as coronavirus relief, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER supplemental. I wanted to wait until we closed the books at the end of June so we had a good handle on the amount that we had left to spend of those awards, and we didn't overextend ourselves in that area. 2 days later, after we adopted our budget, the state came out with their package for our funding, and the funding level was substantially higher than what I built our preliminary budget on. We were going to be funded at $8,700 a pupil, one of the largest increases that we'd seen in state aid in a very long time. It was also, there were some districts that were being paid at a higher rate than others, and that eliminated that funding gap, so everybody was being paid at the $8,700 per pupil. We were no longer allowed to use the super blend formula. I had planned for that in the preliminary budget. Because of the pandemic, we were allowed to take 2 years worth of enrollment and blend those together for a super blend formula. But now we are back to the same old of 90% from the fall count, 10% from the previous spring. And also, the state removed all of the pandemic learning special pupil accounting changes that were put into effect, where we were back to having to meet days and hours requirements for state aid. So that's just a recap of what happened back in June. One thing that I do want to share with the board, it's an important slide of information, is history of enrollment for the district. This enrollment chart does show head count. It does not show FTE. Usually FTE is a slightly smaller number than head count. This head count would include any of our shared time services with the non-public locations as well. It's just a good piece of information to have. I've touched on the monthly board meeting financial reports as far as how the state has lost enrollment statewide, and how the district since the pandemic has seen a somewhat of a drop in enrollment. It's coming back, but we're still in that drop phase. So I just wanted to share with you, because enrollment is an important piece of our budget. So we actually started on this amendment back in December, and I want to thank Sammy Stevens for all of her hard work and efforts working alongside of me as we met with all of the department heads to talk about all the changes. And I'll just cover some of the highlights of what's included in this amendment to you tonight. I had to update for property taxes. Obviously, anytime property tax values increase, we receive operating revenue from non-residential homes for that. And it's kind of like a teeter-totter effect. Whatever you receive in property, if you receive more in property taxes, then less funnels through in state aid, because it's just a net wash effect of the funding allowance. So I adjusted for property tax value changes. We are a district where we are a Headley rollback district. We're not able to levy the full 18 operating mills, because our property tax values have increased faster than the rate of inflation. So we're only able to levy 17.565 mills. So we are unable to collect about $373,000 a year in tax revenue because of that. I adjusted for the foundation allowance change. Budget was built on $8,311. We're receiving $8,700 per pupil. We also built back in that federal and state one-time funding mechanisms. The ESSER one, we had about $68,000 left of that, and I'll go over that on the expense side, what we're using that for. ESSER 2 is about $1.6 million. Coronavirus relief funds, we had about $189,000 left. ESSER supplemental was a state funding piece that came through, and that was about $1.6 million. So you're going to see a lot of change in both the federal and the state area of the budget amendment, and this is the recap of the reasoning why those changes are happening. So here is just a snapshot of how we ended 2021 with revenue, what we adopted in the middle for our preliminary budget back in June, and what I'm bringing you tonight to the board for discussion, where we'll approve it next board meeting, is what the change in revenues look like for the different areas of local, state, federal, and incoming transfers. So it's just a touch on the fact of why the large changes in the state area, which I just covered for the foundation allowance and the ESSER supplemental, and then why the large increase on the federal sources. We incorporated those federal funds back into the budget. So, very sensitive. So, on the expense side of the budget, we didn't have settled contracts for every group at the time that we brought our preliminary budget to the board. So we actually look at every person that's employed by the district, and we update salary costing for those individuals. So we incorporated those changes into the budget. We actually know what our insurance renewal rates are come January by this time, when we can build that into the amendment. I have to take a guesstimation at the time that we build the preliminary. The UAAL rate through Office of Retirement Services, that changes annually in October. So that's another part of the increase in the state area of the budget amendment for revenue. So we adjusted for that across all of the salary line items based on that increase. We met with every department head to talk about their program, their needs, amended their budgets. On the federal side, for the adjustments for ESSER 1, that was the $68,000 that we had left over from the previous year. We're using it for internet-related services and PPE. ESSER 2, that was approximately $1.6 million. We're using it for secondary virtual programming, bus driver hazard pay, and a few other items. Coronavirus relief funds, those were left over from last year, spending them $189,000 on, I didn't take good notes for that, sorry. I apologize, I don't have that in front of me right now. ESSER supplemental, which was the state side of the funding, we're basically using those funds to budget for our elementary virtual academy, virtual school that we have this year. We have applied for SR3 funding. We have not received approval yet. The MDE has only released 2/3 of our award, so we were required to submit a budget for that in December. Still waiting to hear on approval or rejection or any changes that are necessary from them. 20% of the SR3 had a requirement to be set aside for learning loss, so we met those requirements in the planned budget that was sent off to the board. I do know that There is other federal money besides just the ESSER 3 still coming our way. So when I bring you a budget amendment in June, you're probably going to see a large change in that line item of revenue. There's 11T funding coming. I don't know when it's going to be available to us yet. I know that there's going to be a lot of restrictions tied to that money of how it can be spent. It's not going to be just wide open to where you can spend it how you see fit. You're gonna have to follow certain guidelines for it. Tammy in charge of the Curious Kids program, she was just awarded a child care stabilization grant for just under $1 million. So she will be able to funnel that through and use that in her program. So I just want you to have an understanding that that is coming. So it's kind of a busy slide. This is an overall impact of all the changes that were made to the amendment. This is how we ended, the far left column is how we ended last year. That's actual. What I brought to you as preliminary adopted budget is the next column where expenses were exceeding revenues by the $718,000. And now we're amending at this time, bringing it to the board, where we're showing expenses are exceeding revenues by $840,000. So then this slide shows what our ending fund balance was at June 30, 2021, the 13.22%. At the time that we brought you the adopted budget, books were not final for June 30 yet, so that was an estimation number brought to the board of where we thought fund balance would be, still above the required 7%. And then based on all the changes that were taken into consideration for the First Amendment, a projected number, now that's just projected, we won't know final until we close the books on June 30, 11.53%. I don't like this room.
What would you have got if you didn't have all the extra revenue, but you had the expenses built in? I mean, obviously, your revenue is up 7 million and your expenses are up 7 million, obviously. And I understand that you didn't know about the revenue coming in because you didn't know those things, but where would we have gotten that? You know, our expenses couldn't change that much, or were they that much in flux?
Expenses were that much in flux, Kurt, because we hadn't fully decided yet about everything for the virtual modality of instruction for the year. And our teacher contract wasn't settled yet at that time. I'd only built steps into the PEA contract. So a lot of things came into play after we adopted the preliminary budget that would affect that expense bottom line.
6.5%, we knew that the salaries weren't going up 6.5%, right? I mean, the $7 million on $100 million budget, so. It still seems like a big number to have just the expense side of it.
But for each of those one pots of money that we have, there's a corresponding revenue that matches that expense number, so it has a net effect to the overall budget. The way that based on the areas of what we're using.
So you're saying if we didn't have the revenue, we wouldn't have the expense?
Correct. Because these grants have a zero net effect to our bottom line. The revenue matches the expense on these federal grants all the way through the budget. The ESSER grants, the CRF, it has a zero net effect to the bottom line. It's one-time money. Correct. Decisions would have to be made. Correct. Any other questions? I have a couple tidbits. The governor's going to release her budget on Wednesday morning. Certain items are already starting to leak about what she's proposing her foundation allowance to be and certain retention bonuses that she's building into her budget. But those, obviously, that's her recommendation of a budget. It's not a final budget. House and Senate still have to work through the budget and conference committee, so.
Yeah, my question was gonna be about that $8,700 foundation allowance, which was a very generous
That-
increase last year, and our reading of the tea leaves on whether that number is sustainable.
That
or
number
maybe
is
could
sustainable.
increase.
Looking at consensus revenue estimating numbers, we've gone past our projected targets. That number is sustainable, and governor's actually suggesting a 5% increase on the foundation allowance for next year.
What did you say?
A 5% increase, so she's proposing, now this is just her number, it doesn't mean it's the final number. She's proposing $9,135 per pupil.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of that fund, isn't that built on sales tax? And then you divide it by the number of students, and we've heard that statewide, the number of students is way, way down. And so it's more money per pupil.
More information will come out on Wednesday about it, but this is just leaks of information that I have right now. Any
Well,
other?
I mean, it sounds like an opportunity between now and June for next year's budget is to be thinking about, you know, what other value-added things we could do with that extra funding, you know, knock on wood that it plays out.
Paul, real quick on the enrollment reduction. Is ours any larger percentage-wise than like surrounding districts, or, I mean, it would be concerning unless you're seeing this everywhere?
I have not polled our surrounding districts to see what their enrollment loss is, Rusty, so I don't have that information here with me. I just know that a lot of districts are down, but I did not ask each of our districts in our county what they were down by.
K-RESA would have that though, right, Randy? They would have the number for every district?
Yeah, perhaps, I'm not sure.
Right, I'm sure they do at some level.
I just know the state was down like 50,000 students, and, I mean, a lot of that
Statewide.
concentrated in, you know, Detroit, and, you know, some of these urban areas, which is concerning, but, yeah, I was curious how we're doing, almost in Southwest Michigan.
I could spend a little bit of time looking at that.
Not too much time, I just like a gate, so, thank you.
Yeah, because, you know, we see our pupil drop, which, you know, if everybody else is dropping more, it doesn't concern me as much. But, you know, if that trend were to continue for 2 or 3 more years, that's concerning.
Well, right, and we didn't hit the blended number that I budgeted for. We were 76 students short from my blended number.
And I'm sorry, one more question. Are those numbers using the same formulas?
Yeah.
So that drops, that's the exact same formula for all those numbers? Because I know they changed the funding formulas, but.
We're back to 90-10 blend, 90% of the fall, 10% of the previous spring. So we already have our numbers right now for our blended enrollment for the year. We have count day coming up on Wednesday. That's actually 10% of next year's enrollment number. Any other questions?
But your 78 kids is still less than 1% of our total population of students.
I would have hoped that I would have gone too low and it could have gone the other way, but I was still okay knowing that I got close in the grand scheme of things.
Well, I thank you for your report, appreciate the information, and thank Sammy as well for making all this information available. With that, we are adjourned, thank you.
Thank you, Randy.